Okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Rumbidza Ngandini, and welcome to Understanding Mental Health with me. So today we're going to be talking about trauma, and I'm going to bring in a guest. I'm going to bring in Aadithya Nath. So Aadithya is a counseling psychologist, but I'll just let him introduce himself along the way. So right now, let me just add him, and then we can start. So guys, we're living in trying times. Oh, hi, there he is.
Hey,
Hi.
can you
Hi.
hear me, Ruby?
It's been long.
I know it has been so long. Thanks for inviting me.
It's okay, it's okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so I guess we can start. So,
right,
introduce
Ruby.
yourself. Okay, I already know you, oh, because we were classmates.
Yeah,
This guy
yeah,
was
really?
mate for more than a year. We used to sit together,
Yeah,
so I'm actually happy to have you here now, and I'm happy that we're going to be talking about mental health. So,
right.
can you just introduce yourself so that our listeners can know
Sure, Ruby.
who you are?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Aadithya Nath. I'm a counseling psychologist in Bangalore, Karnataka, which is in India. I graduated in November 2020 from the same university as Ruby here, and I've been uh, practicing on my own for some time. I've been also freelancing with the company. Currently, have joined a mental health startup, so practicing mental health all the way.
Wow, this is nice.
Yeah,
I'm happy that you're doing your own thing now and you're freelancing and doing a lot of things. That's really
yeah.
nice. So
Thank you,
today we're
Ruby.
going to be talking about trauma, right? So can you just
Yeah,
define what trauma is so that our listeners can know and understand about the topic?
right, right. So, based on the research, what researchers have finally sort of identified what trauma is that it is an emotional response to a distressing or a situation that is overwhelming. And when I say overwhelming, we have all these five senses, visual to be able to hear. So when it is overwhelming to these senses, and this situation is distressful, uh, that causes trauma, or that is trauma. Trauma is that emotional response. And another thing is it is a subjective response. So what is traumatic for one person needn't necessarily be traumatic for another person.
That's true. That's
And
true.
even to get to this definition of it, I said it easily in one line, but it took like for a very long time for us to even come to this definition of trauma, because historically, if you see, from the time of cave paintings you could see incidents of trauma, and then there were stories and myths that talk about traumatic events. There were certain philosophers also who uh, sort of spoke about something like trauma, but of course they didn't use the word trauma. That is something that came later on after the 19th and 20th century, especially with the wars and child sexual abuse, which was around the industrial revolution. Women and children started working, and they started to see these new phenomena, and people showed interest, and research developed from there.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. And like you said, you talked about child abuse. There are also
Yeah,
accidents, natural disasters, wars.
accident. Yeah.
Like now there's war going on between
Oh, in,
Ukraine and Russia. You're like, oh, those are traumatic events. So thank you very much for, giving us the
yeah.
definition of trauma and explaining in detail. So what are the symptoms of trauma?
So we can understand the symptoms in different ways, because we have the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual developed by America, the fifth edition, which has a separate section for trauma and stress related disorders. So that is one way, and then there is also the International Classification of Diseases by the WHO, which gives you uh, their symptoms classification. However, to understand it in a much more simple way, the symptoms of trauma lie in a spectrum, a biological, psychological, social, cultural, and spiritual spectrum. Mouthful. So biological is when your nervous system is affected, uh, be it because of overwhelming of the senses. It can be a single sense, visual. You might see something happening, and that is perceived to be traumatic for you, or it could be a tactile, what you feel, what you hear. So what happens to the nervous system is that it either becomes overly sensitive or overly reactive,
Okay.
like a situation that may not elicit an exaggerated feeling of anger might elicit an exaggerated feeling of anger. So that is on one extreme, or it might not elicit the normal response that anybody would expect. So one would expect a person to get angry, but they might be just indifferent. So two spectrum of the way in which nervous system can respond. So that is the biological aspect. And
Yeah.
psychologically, it could be flashbacks of that particular traumatic event happening again and again in the form of pictures, in the form of dreams or nightmares. So that when it comes back, it re-traumatizes. So that is the psychological element to it, and there is a social element because we human beings are social beings. We are all social beings. So how we attach with another human being in terms of the relationships we form, be it romantic relationship, be it friendship. So it is seen in this friendship in the form of maybe an insecurity. So there was a researcher by the name Bowlby. So he looks at social relationships by explaining it through two concepts. That is through self-esteem, and the other concept is interpersonal trust. How much you trust others and your self-esteem, your worth, your own self-worth. So if your self-esteem and interpersonal trust, or how much you trust another person, if it is healthy and both are good, that means you can form secure relationships. However, when a traumatic event occurs, it can affect this part, and it may, if it lowers your self-esteem, but then you still trust in others. So because of that lack of self-esteem, it can cause anxiety that, hey, I'm not a person who's worth it. Why is this person still with me? It can cause an anxiety that way. It can cause a person to be too much clingy. Now, these are symptoms for other kind of issues also, but then since trauma also, this is one of the ways trauma can manifest, being too much clingy, too anxious when a person goes away. Or let's look at it, if the self-esteem is high, but then trusting in others is low, so then it becomes a sort of a mistrust in others.
Okay.
You might think that, okay, this person has something against me, I can't trust him. You can't trust him. So trust issues build up. But then your self-esteem is high. You believe in yourself, but you can't trust anybody else. Therefore, relationship is, messy. And then it could be both down. You don't trust others, but you don't have self-esteem also. So you can't form social relationships with that.
Yeah,
So
that's
that is the social aspect of it. Then there is cultural aspect. So this is cultural aspect. I'll give you an example to get this understanding across to all of the viewers here. uh, let's say there is a victim of rape, and this victim is a woman. Now how does the culture see this, right? Or let's just take somebody losing virginity, and if the culture sees it as, oh, now the women has been used, or now this girl or woman is now impure, so now that means that this girl or this woman can never be in a relationship, right? Cultural context, she has to get out of the culture. So culture is a part of the identity. You have to lose your culture and you have to get out. So this is in terms of culture, how the culture views trauma and how that can affect trauma. So one of the examples, but this is the cultural spectrum of it. And then there is a spiritual spectrum. It can be religion. It can be that a person may just be like, there is no God. How can this happen? If there was a God, how would this happen? Or it can change the meaning one has towards life. Maybe this person might have had even before the traumatic event, but now meaning has changed. Things, the world that this person was living in before has now changed because of the trauma. The identity has changed. So many things have changed. So this is one way to understand the spectrum of symptoms or spectrum in which trauma can manifest itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can actually relate with some of the things that you were saying. I have
Yeah.
clients who have low self-esteem because they've experienced trauma,
Oh, yeah.
and also have flashbacks, nightmares.
Right.
Like, I can really relate with most of the things that you were saying. That it's
Yeah.
totally real. It's not just
Yeah.
like reading from the books and all. There are actually people who are experiencing those things you've explained right
Yeah. Yeah.
now. So
It's documented thanks to certain developed countries. I mean, certain countries don't have much research, but it's documented, like Western America mostly. They have a well-established unit which is sort of studying these things.
yeah,
So
we're
I'm deriving
still,
all this from there. Yeah.
yeah, I understand. We're still,
Yeah.
especially for us in Africa, we don't really talk about these things. We don't really talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
trauma, or even, the part where you're talking about being abused or losing your virginity and all those things.
Yeah.
Like, that's actually a traumatic experience. That imagine you've lost your
Mm.
virginity and then the society is now ruling you off, and then now they're saying this
Mm.
girl is impure, or like it's traumatic for someone, but in our society and in our culture we don't even
Yep.
put that into consideration, or we don't even try to understand that this person is going through a difficult moment, or this person is now going through a stressful event. We just think of
Is that
condemning.
the same in Zimbabwe also? Is that the same there? I mean, do you have the same kind of cultural thing going on?
Well, it's now things are changing a little bit,
It's the
but
same, right? Same
back
here.
then
Yeah.
it was like that. Now things are kind
Oh,
of better, but back then it was like that. Like people would condemn
oh,
you and they would say you're impure and all. Now people don't really
yeah.
like consider that, but back then definitely it was there. So yeah, I know
It
in
was there.
in India definitely
It's
it's
still
there.
there in certain pockets. It's more, and it's very close to the culture. So
Yeah,
it's there.
okay. Okay, so what are the types of trauma? We've talked about the symptoms. So what are the
Yeah.
types of?
So the types of trauma, that there is a lot of research there, and they were just some people simplify it and be like, these are the types of trauma, and some people are like, there are many types. But then,
Mhm.
I've sort of looked at everything, and I've sort of wrote down some of the types so that I can explain it in a more without
Okay.
missing out anything. So broadly, trauma is either natural things that happen naturally, as in like a natural disaster, COVID-19. We think it happened naturally. Anyway,
Yeah,
that's a
that's
different story.
so
That's a different story. Yeah, let's not
traumatic.
go there. But then, natural disasters, cyclones and earthquakes and all of such things. And, or it can be human induced also, sexual abuse, or like again during the Industrial Revolution, or why during Industrial Revolution. Anytime a person is exploited, uh, that those kind of rapes and crimes, sexual crimes, or even in a car accident can actually cause trauma. So there was a client once who was a hockey player, and since he used to play hockey, and he had a leg injury which didn't allow him to play anymore. So that was pretty traumatic for him. So the subjective nature of trauma sort of gives it different types. So some other interesting types of trauma that I've sort of noted down from certain researchers are trauma that is individual trauma,
Okay.
and there is group trauma which is experienced by a group of people. Example, military. Let's say a certain military group was sent for an operation, but they were captured as prisoners of war.
Okay.
So then when they come back, we see more. This is more documented again in the US and European armies, because they have psychiatrists and psychologists in their team. So when they come back, they are diagnosed for post-traumatic stress disorder, post the trauma that they have been through as prisoners of war. So in those cases, so this particular group, they have this trauma is what do you say? It is only connected to this particular group, the military personnel, and then there is community level trauma. Uh, like for instance, I'm not sure how it works in Zimbabwe, but there are certain communities are oppressed or discriminated against, stereotyped and pushed aside. So in India we have something called as caste system. I think I've maybe in the previous one of our videos I've said. So certain castes are ostracized and pushed aside and looked down upon. So historically they have been oppressed. So certain communities are being oppressed, and that causes trauma because it can be in the way of bullying or discrimination, stereotyping. So that is community level trauma, and there is mass trauma. So that's like if I'm in the neighboring country and there is an invasion happening. Let's take Afghanistan and the Taliban coming in. Imagine how the women. So at that time, trauma was. Yep, I got stuck, right?
Yeah. I had lost you for a few seconds.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a trauma at a massive scale. Disasters can also cause trauma at a massive scale. So that is one thing. And historical trauma, like I mentioned historically, African Americans were oppressed historically. Slave trade, slavery. So historical trauma, sometimes also called intergenerational trauma. Generation to generation, certain trauma is passed down. So then there is interpersonal trauma, which is seen as intimate partner violence, like. So that comes under interpersonal trauma happening through relationships. And there is developmental trauma, that's like as you're growing as a child. Maybe it is a war situation, or it could be adverse childhood experiences, or a child just living through the economic crisis, and because of that the child is deprived of many resources, or it could just be poor parenting, child neglect, or abusive authoritarian parenting. So these things are, again, it is not a definite short thing that it has to happen, again, because trauma is subjective. Some cases it happens, some cases it doesn't. And then there is system oriented trauma. System oriented trauma is like, let's say a person who had a traumatic experience, okay, and this person wants to go to the police and complain now.
Okay.
First he goes to the social worker, explains it to the social worker, this and this happened to me. Now I'm traumatized. Now he goes to the police and tells the police, so many things happened to me and I'm traumatized. Then he goes to the lawyer and tells to the lawyer, so blah 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 happened, traumatized. Then he goes to the judge. How many times is this person who's traumatized saying the same incident again and again and again? So because the system did not have any system in place, any framework in place to prevent re-traumatization, the traumatization, there is the person who's already harmed is going through more and more harm. System oriented trauma involves sometimes unconsciously we hurt people, right? How many of our institutions or systems are trauma informed? Hardly any. Even in the well-developed country like USA, sometimes they have a tag of trauma informed, but they are not actually trauma informed. They think this is what trauma informed is, but with the people who do the research, right, when it doesn't match. So sometimes people confuse it with trauma focused care and trauma informed care. Trauma informed is to be informed about certain things about trauma. Trauma focused is you're focused on that. So because of these issues, the systems that we live in, social systems or any other economic systems, whatever institutions that we live in, sort of cause trauma or maintain trauma or re-traumatizes. So these are some of the broad categories of trauma. Because it's subjective, it varies,
Okay.
Like
wow. I'm always mind blown when you're talking.
I just research.
Yes.
Notes, copying.
That's why I brought you here, because I know you do your research. You do your research properly, and So I also learned something, because most of the things you were talking, I don't even know most of them, like the developmental trauma. That one I know. because of the childhood trauma and all. So that one I know. But like most of the things that you mentioned here, I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
I just read it for this actually. I didn't know the in depth about this, but then I was
I'm like,
always interested. I did a workshop actually last week. I was attending one on being trauma informed.
oh,
Then last week, and then you came up with this. I'm like, hey, fantastic.
wow, this is interesting, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, so I'm
So
kind of prepared. Kind of prepared.
that's good. That's good. So before I ask you my last question,
Huh,
right? So have you ever had a
oh,
traumatic
very.
experience? I know like almost everyone has had like
Huh?
we've all had like a traumatic experience.
Hmm.
So have you ever had one or probably
Me.
multiple traumatic experiences? I know
Oh,
obviously.
every day. Oh, yeah, every day we are exposed to traumatic experiences, right? I mean, look at the news. If you switch on the news, then you have something that can sort of, like shake you. Like, let's look at Afghanistan. I mean, could any country or anybody stop that invasion? I mean, they just came in, and people looking around, it would be hurtful. I mean, they would really think that, I mean, is there, that's it, they just came in, they would think that, or it could be locally something that's happening, maybe that's communal violence happening, and then if you happen to be from the community who is being oppressed or who's being attacked by another community, then you would really think, I mean, can I go out? Is it really possible for me to go out? So, oh yeah, another thing about this trauma is that, there is a difference. Some researchers actually show a differentiation between a crisis trauma and a disaster, which is in a spectrum. So
Okay.
crisis is like 12 to 24 hours of exposure. Also the kind of exposure, how close you are to the traumatic event, and how much you perceive it as a traumatic event. What is the intensity with which you feel it? So if that is for 24 to 24 hours, that's like crisis. And in a certain months, which I have wrote down somewhere, yeah, if it is ongoing, then it is trauma. If it is like 1 week to 24 months, then that's considered as a disaster, things like that. But then, yeah, I think I have had, the thing with trauma is, you never really know unless you know your own. You have to be very self-aware to know
Yeah,
that. I
that's
mean, you
true.
might see something on the news and it affects you, but then you just ignore it, you know, and then it shows up in your behaviors, right? Then you'll be
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't want to go out at this time. It's very hard to pinpoint, right? It can come off in the form of like an extreme aversion or an anger. No, I don't even want to go there, or so it's hard to figure out. But I'm sure I've had my share of incidents, and probably there will be more, and that is why therapy helps, and good relationship helps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know the part where you say that, sometimes you
yeah,
experience a traumatic event and then you don't even
yeah,
know that you've been affected.
yeah.
I was just
Until a point of time. Yeah,
Yeah, I was just reading through and I got to know about that there's vicarious trauma where a person
Hiroshima.
also, get to experience trauma just by being close to someone who has been through a
Uh-huh.
traumatic event. And just saying that like mental health
Yeah.
professionals and just someone who's taking care of someone who's suffering
Hmm.
from trauma can also experience that. And now I just got to think, I was just thinking to myself, like, you know what? We are all mental health professionals. We meet people every day. We talk to people who have traumatic experiences. And, probably you have a sister who's probably suffering from post traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
and you're taking care of that sister. And you yourself now have vicarious
Yeah.
trauma, but you don't even know that you have it. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting. I think that's why I'm more interested in this topic because
Yeah.
I've realized
Oh.
that we all get to,
Yeah.
experience traumatic events and we don't
Hmm.
even know that we've been affected. And then later
Yeah.
on, you see yourself reacting in a certain way, or now you have certain
Yeah.
behavior, but you don't even know where they're coming from. But truth is, they're
Yeah.
coming from that traumatic event that you
Yeah.
saw, or probably you went through, and you didn't know that you were affected emotionally or physically.
Yeah.
So
It
it's quite
probably we knew at a like at a deeper level, we probably knew it, but maybe the situation was such that, hey, it's everybody goes through it, Man
Exactly.
up, buddy, everybody goes through it. So you're like, maybe, yeah, everybody
Yeah.
goes through it. But then in your mind, you know that, hey, no, but that was hurtful, Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
like
there's a
that, it's
question, right? There's a
complex
question, yeah.
mechanisms inside.
Someone said, can trauma cause memory loss?
In some cases, yes. I'm not a trauma expert, but then, yeah, I have read about cases where, so memory loss. So it's memory loss. Let me see how I can. So a traumatic event is an event that is unpleasant, right? So
Mm-hmm.
our brain, our mind has certain mechanisms to sort of shield you from any sort of unpleasantness. So what the mind or the brain will do is that it will make you forget things, Be like, okay, take this, puts it in the unconscious file. You're not going to see that for some time. Let's just
Yeah,
keep it here, So that can happen sometimes. So maybe that is seen as a memory loss. It's done deliberately so that you don't. It's a brain, protection. Like, okay, if you know this, you're going to be anxious. Okay, let me just put it back where you cannot find it. So
exactly.
there is a mechanism. Yeah.
And when there's a
Yeah.
trigger, then you start reacting in a certain way and you don't know
Yeah, that's
why
true.
you are reacting in
Yeah.
that way. But it's because of, that information that has been put in the, in
Yeah,
our
it's
subconscious
still it.
mind, deep down there,
Yeah.
so that you forget. So I hope you
Yeah.
answered memory. I think there's another. Okay, that's the question actually. Okay, it's fine. So, like
Yeah.
we were talking, right? You just said that almost every day we go through traumatic events. It could be through
Yeah.
news, or you probably
Yeah.
just see an accident walking by. So
Yeah.
what
It's because
advice?
it's subjective. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because it's subjective. It maybe for some people it's not. For some people it does affect. Hard to pinpoint. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Cut you off.
I totally get that. I always tell people that we react differently. We might go through the same event or issue or problem, but we definitely react um, differently. So it's subjective, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So, what advice can you give to our viewers and people who are going to listen to this discussion?
Oh, yeah. So it's good to be trauma informed, and the best part is the literature and the knowledge is already out there. Especially if you could know where you could find these resources from, then it would be useful for you to take it. So one such place is called SAMHSA. So SAMHSA is basically Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration Services, which is a part of uh, US Health Department. So what they do is they have developed a framework uh, which shows how to be trauma informed and which shows the uh, principles for being trauma informed.
Okay.
So that is one thing. So this is one thing, to be trauma informed. And the other thing is to know that there is a concept called as post-traumatic growth. So everybody who's going through a trauma is not doomed. Just because a trauma happened, that doesn't mean that you're doomed. Now you're a victim for life. There is also something called as post-traumatic growth. That is, in three-fourths of the cases where trauma has happened, people have seen, researchers have found that people have actually grown from the trauma through resilience. Resilience is the ability to bounce back. So trauma, sort of, you are going in life, then trauma happens and you're down, then you bounce back. How that bounce back happens is if when you get the right resources, good relationships, therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and the environment for growth. So then that helps you to be resilient, and uh, most of us have resilience. And I can't say all of us because that's not really provable. But then, yeah, most of us are resilient, and most of the cases of trauma, they have seen a growth, and they reach to a stage of through resilience, they reach to a stage of thriving. So just as an anecdotal example, you can look at the movie Batman by Christopher Nolan, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Batman and Joker, of course, they have had traumatic incidents. So Batman, Bruce Wayne, it was falling down the hole, and then bats were around him, and he was afraid of bat. So eventually he sort of confronts that fear. So it was traumatic for him. But then what happens to that trauma? It becomes his identity for some time. He becomes Batman, right? He didn't, because bat was the symbol for his fear. So whatever has happened, he did not say that trauma didn't happen. There's nothing happened. He didn't say that. He accepted that this happened, this trauma has happened, and it is now a part of my identity. So Batman integrated it into his identity. And the best part of Christopher Nolan's Batman is he then actually, he's like, he quits being Batman by in the third part. So that is like, he took up that identity of what he was afraid of. Later he grew from the trauma. So that can, I mean, I interpret it as thriving. You're resilient, you're in survival mode, now you're thriving. So then he's like, I don't need the bad costume anymore. I can be my own person and live. So that is sort of like an example for post-traumatic growth. So that is possible in many cases, and through help, psychological help. Some people don't have the privilege. Therefore, you take the example of Joker. Again, look at the condition that in the movie, if you see the condition that Joker was in, lack of privilege, couldn't afford therapy, all of that situation. So if you have the privilege, if you can afford therapy, then go for therapy, and that actually leads to post-traumatic growth. And for being trauma informed, you can find this out online. But if you want, I can mention it. This is available. Like there's something called as 4 hours of being trauma informed, and then there are 6 principles. If you want, I can say it. But it's available throughout.
You should send me after the session, but you can mention them so that our viewers can just learn.
Right. So the 4 hours. The first hour is realizing, like Rumbi was saying, you have to realize that there is an event and that is traumatic for me. To acknowledge that this traumatic event has an impact on me. So realizing the impact of the trauma that it has on you, and then next thing is to recognize the way the trauma is manifesting, the symptoms. As an individual, in your family, everybody might be showing the same, or in your culture. So recognizing these symptoms in the institutions, how these symptoms are coming up, and then is responding to this. Responding to these, it can be through policy, being trauma informed, making your policing system trauma informed, making hospitals trauma informed, being a trauma informed therapist, or being a trauma informed teacher, whichever profession you have to be trauma informed. And then the last R is to resist re-traumatization, because they've already traumatized. The thing is, just because you're traumatized, we can't refrain from asking them what happened. We can't refrain, otherwise you wouldn't know. So minimize that. Maybe get it from them at one point when they are ready, they have the capacity to talk about it. For that, you need to help the person to build that capacity through building boundaries, through assertiveness. So first, help them get strong, or help them, not strong exactly, to be assertive and to have a hold over their identity, because trauma has attacked their identity and their values in life. So after that, then we can talk about, okay, now tell me what happened. Then you can go and talk to other people. So the capacity building is very important. That is why even when something traumatic happens, even in institutions or anywhere, sexual assault, people don't come out immediately.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Then people ask, they'll be like, why didn't you tell me before when it happened? Why didn't you just say it at that time? Because it's not possible for everybody. Maybe it's an aggressive person to be like, I'm going to report this now. But that is being assertive and aggressive. But everybody is not like that.
Assertive, yeah, that's true.
So they have to question themselves, center themselves, and then only then they can come out. When they are ready, only then they can come out and talk about it. So they should not be forced. Rather, they should be helped to be, build that capacity, something like that. And there are 6 other principles, but I hope all of you will go and look at what those 6 principles given by Shamsa are.
You're going to send them in my inbox on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Why do I have to?
I'll send you the research. There are plenty of videos, plenty of videos. I'm going to send that to you.
Okay.
So you can share it with them, all of you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. So I just wanted to laugh at you. You love the Joker movie, right?
Both Batman and Joker. It's a very good example, you know.
But you
The
used
last
the,
hour,
the Joker movie used to talk
yeah,
about
yes.
back then.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That was the time it came out, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But you know,
Joker
you have
movies.
to watch the movie. That's I don't know
Yeah, it's a
why.
work of art. You
I
didn't
don't.
watch it.
I no, I didn't. I remember you once talked about it. You know, back then when we were
Yeah.
still in college, when we were
I
still
don't know
students.
who all I spoke about it to. Hey buddy, come here. You want to talk about Joker? Right.
Remember my desk mates, so I remember
Yeah.
all these things.
Oh, right, right, right.
Yeah. So thank you very much.
Intellectual conversations.
Yeah. Thank you very
Right.
much for,
Thank you for
coming
calling me, Rumbi.
and just
Yeah.
talking about trauma and, teaching us and helping everyone out there. I really appreciate you and I really appreciate your effort. So, hey, this marks the end of our session, and I just want to thank all our viewers who were here. I saw a lot of people,
Yeah.
and I'm just happy that we had people
You're
who joined.
welcome, memory.
Yeah, Memory, that's my
Yeah.
sister.
Oh, so she's thanking me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, that's my
Thank
sister.
you
So
for joining in, memory. Thank you, Rumbi. Thanks to you too.
thank you. I
Keep
really
doing these things. It's a very interesting, you know.
Yeah, I realize
Yeah.
that, we're living in trying times. A lot of people are
Yeah.
struggling, a lot of people are committing suicide, and, they're
Yeah.
just suffering in silence and they don't have anyone to talk to. So I figured if I can,
Yeah.
start this, I used to do talk shows last year, you remember, we did
Right, right,
another
yeah.
one in mental health, yeah. So I
Yeah,
figured
yeah,
I
yeah.
should continue so that I can help people out there, bring awareness and help them
Right,
understand
right.
about mental
That's right.
health. Yeah, a lot of things are happening. I don't know in India, but here a lot of people they're committing suicide,
Oh,
a lot of people suffering from depression. There are a whole lot
right.
of stories and issues. So it's like, whoa. So I was like, okay, what can I do to help these people? And I was like, okay, let me just, do this talk show. But we're
Yeah.
also doing a campaign with Revolve Generation. So I work at Revolve Generation. It's a foundation, and we're running a campaign called A Cry for Help. It's a campaign
Oh,
for mental health. Yeah, we've been doing that since 2020, I think end of 2020 up to now. So I'm really passionate about these things. Like I really want to help
yeah.
people and make sure that everyone understand about these things so that they don't have to suffer in silence. They're going through
Yeah.
something, then they have to at least look for someone to talk to or seek help. So thank you very much, Aadithya. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And it's good to see you. See, I'm
Yeah,
smiling.
you too. You're fulfilling the first hour, realizing the impact of that's
Yeah.
very nice. Some action taken in that direction. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Finally,
So
yeah, people
you
can use it to respond.
you wanted to say
You know?
something?
No, I said people can use this to respond.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, that's
information. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you everyone who's
Right.
watching. This marks the end of our session. I'm just going to end this
Right.
live now. Enjoy it.
Bye bye,
Oh,
Rumbi. Bye
well,
bye, everyone.
I know it's already 10 there, right?
It's 10:10. Yeah.
Yeah, so good night and sleep well.
Good night, Rumbi. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye.
How do you stop?